Let me tell you how everything began to unravel. It wasn't some subtle feeling or a whisper of suspicion. It all started with a meeting I wasn't even supposed to attend. I work in marketing, and my wife Karen is in HR at a different company. Our worlds unexpectedly collided one Friday, a long, exhausting day when nothing seemed to go right. I got a call from one of our partners about a mix-up with an upcoming project and was told to come down to a shared office space they were using for a meeting. I was already feeling the weight of the day, but I headed over anyway. The building was a modern, sleek office downtown, and I couldn't help but notice it was the same one where Karen's company rented some extra space. I sat in the lobby, scrolling through my phone, waiting for someone from the partner team to show up when I spotted something out of the corner of my eye, a familiar figure. It was Karen, but she wasn't alone. She sat at one of the tables near the window, leaning in close to some guy. He had that polished corporate look, a sharp suit, bright tie, expensive watch. She laughed, but not the way she usually did, the laugh that lights up her whole face. No, this was different, quieter, more intimate. Then I saw him reach across the table and tuck her hair behind her ear, just like I used to do when we first started dating. For a moment I froze. My body refused to accept what I was seeing, and I couldn't look away or even breathe. I recognized the guy, Greg. He was someone Karen had mentioned before. He handed her a small velvet box, and when she opened it, I saw a necklace shimmer in the light. She touched it gently, smiling in a way that made my heart sink. It wasn't just any smile, it was the kind that showed she felt cherished, a look I hadn't seen her give me in what felt like forever. It wasn't just the tenderness of the moment that hit me. It was the fact that she hadn't mentioned this meeting, this lunch, or this man. The way she looked at him, I had always thought that was reserved for me. I wanted to march over there and demand answers, but my legs wouldn't move. I felt trapped, paralyzed. Then, the receptionist called my name, snapping me out of it, telling me the meeting room was ready. I stood, though it felt like the weight of what I'd just witnessed was pulling me down. I walked into the meeting in a daze, my mind replaying that scene over and over like a broken record. I tried to focus on the meeting, but the words around me turned into static. After about half an hour, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself, muttering something about checking on a project, and left the room. My legs carried me back to the cafe area where I had seen them, but by the time I got there, they were gone. The table was empty. The only trace of them left behind was a coffee cup and a napkin with a lipstick print, Karen's lipstick. The same shade I had bought her last year, telling her it made her look like a queen. The first took a photo of the table, the napkin, and the half-empty glass with Greg's fingerprints on it. I didn't even know why I did it. Maybe I needed proof for myself that I wasn't imagining things, that this wasn't just some nightmare. That night, Karen came home all smiles. She had bought groceries and said she wanted to cook us something special for dinner. She moved around the kitchen, chopping vegetables, humming, acting like nothing was wrong. She wore that necklace, the one that wasn't from me. My mind was racing. Should I say something? Should I ask her who Greg was? Instead, I grabbed a beer and sat at the kitchen table, watching her. She seemed so at ease, like she hadn't just been sharing secret moments and gifts with another man hours earlier. I felt a rage bubbling inside me, but it wasn't ready to surface. Not yet. I needed more than just a look and a necklace. I needed her to slip up, to give me something undeniable. The following week was a blur. I went through the motions: work, gym, dinners with Karen, but my mind was constantly buzzing with anger and suspicion. If Karen had any idea that I knew, she didn't show it. She kept smiling, kept talking about her day, and I watched her every move, questioning everything. One night, while she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I would. I went through her phone. My hands shook as I unlocked it, heart pounding in my chest. Her texts were mostly innocent chats with friends, family, and me. But then I opened her email, and things started falling into place. There were deleted messages, ones that hadn't fully disappeared because of some syncing issue, and Greg's name was right there. Subject lines like "meeting follow-up" and "had a great time today" filled the screen. But the one that hit hardest was still in her inbox, a message from a few days ago with no subject, just a string of emojis: a heart, a wine glass, a bed. My vision blurred with anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. She'd be out of the shower soon. I closed everything, put the phone back, and sat on the bed, trying to focus on anything else. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back at me, haunted eyes, sunken face, jaw clenched tight. She came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her wet hair dripping, and smiled at me like everything was perfectly normal. "Hey babe, I was thinking we could have a movie night. I really need to unwind after the week I've had," she said, her voice light and sweet, as if she hadn't just been exchanging secret messages with her boss. I forced a smile and nodded. "Sure, you picked the movie," I replied, but my thoughts were far away. I had to catch her in the act, to see it for myself. The next day I did something completely out of character. I followed her. She said she had a quick meeting at work, something about a big HR issue that needed attention on a Saturday. She left the house, looking far too polished for a simple office errand, every detail meticulously in place. After waiting 10 minutes, I got in my car and trailed behind her, but she didn't drive to her office. Instead, she headed across town to a high-end restaurant. It was still early, so the place was mostly empty, but there he was, Greg, sitting at a table near the back. When he saw her, he stood up with a smile. She walked over to him, and they hugged, not just any hug, but one that lingered. His hand slid down to her lower back, and she rested her head on his chest, as if they were the only two people in the world. My hands clenched around the steering wheel, the leather digging into my palms, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to jump out of the car, march over to their table, and confront them with all the lies and deceit. But instead, I reached for my phone and snapped a picture. The window had a slight glare, but it was clear enough. Her arms were around his neck, his face close to hers. I took a few more photos, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Then they sat down, and I watched her laugh, that same intimate laugh I'd seen before. They ordered drinks, and she reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. This wasn't a meeting or a business lunch. It was something more, something that had been happening right under my nose for who knows how long. After a while they got up, paid the bill, and walked out together. Greg led her to his sleek black SUV, a car that probably cost more than my yearly salary. He opened the door for her, and she slid inside, smiling in a way that made my stomach churn. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty parking space. Part of me wanted to follow them, but I didn't need to see where they were going. I already knew, and I had the proof I needed. When I got home, Karen was already there, humming to herself in the kitchen, making sandwiches like she hadn't just spent the afternoon with someone else. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment. Something snapped inside me. She turned and saw me. "Hey, you're back early," she said, her eyes bright and her voice full of fake innocence. I walked over to her, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "How was lunch with Greg?" For just a second, her mask slipped. Her eyes widened and her smile faltered. But she recovered quickly. Karen was always good at that. "Greg? Oh, you mean at the office? It was just a quick thing, no big deal," she said smoothly. I could feel my pulse in my ears, anger rising. I pulled out my phone, showed her the picture, and said, "Really? Because this doesn't look like no big deal to me." Her face drained of color as she stared at the photo, then back at me. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For once, she didn't have a quick lie ready to explain everything away. Her silence spoke louder than any excuse she could have made. She finally spoke, but instead of admitting anything, she let out a scoff, her expression hardening. "Are you seriously following me now?" she said, her voice turning cold. "Do you really think I'm having an affair just because I had lunch with my boss? You know how important my job is. You're being paranoid, Ryan." There it was, the gaslighting, the twisting of the truth, the outright lies. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. I slammed my hand on the counter, making the plates rattle. "But don't you dare," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I saw the way you two were. I saw how he touched you, how you smiled at him. That's not work, Karen." And this, I pointed at the necklace she was wearing. "Don't tell me this is from the girls at work. Is Greg one of the girls now?" She took a step back, her face darkening as she calculated her next move. "You're being crazy," she spat. "Greg is my boss, Ryan. He's supportive. He actually listens when I talk about my work, unlike you." That hit hard. She said it with so much venom, like I was some useless burden dragging her down. I could barely breathe, the hurt and rage twisting together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I wanted to scream, to make her understand just how much she was destroying me. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. She wasn't going to tell the truth. "Helping you through it," I snapped, my voice breaking. "Is that what you call sneaking around, Karen? Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you think I can't see what's right in front of me? I saw you with him, the way you hugged him, the way he looked at you. That's not support, that's betrayal. She rolled her eyes, as if I was throwing a tantrum over nothing. It was that dismissiveness, that wave of her hand like my pain was trivial, that finally broke me. You're overreacting, she said flatly. I don't know what you think you saw, but you're wrong. Greg and I are just friends. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh you let out when you've reached your breaking point. When you finally grasp the unfiltered truth, it hits hard. Friends don't gift each other jewelry like that. Friends don't send love emojis, and friends certainly don't spend their weekends together behind their spouse's back. For a moment she said nothing, just stared at me with a hardened expression, her eyes narrowing. Then I saw it, the shift. She went from pretending to care to outright defiance. Fine, she said, her voice cold as ice. You want the truth, Ryan? Maybe I like spending time with Greg because he doesn't constantly question me. Maybe he treats me like I matter, like I'm more than just someone who makes his dinners and cleans his house. It felt like she'd slapped me. The words hit with a force that made me take a step back, my head spinning. Is that really what you think? I whispered. That I don't care about you? That everything I've done for us means nothing? She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She stood tall, chin raised, eyes filled with something cold and unfamiliar. You care about the version of me you want, Ryan, the one who stays home and fits into your perfect little life plan. But that's not me anymore. I need more. I deserve more. In that moment, my heart shattered. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the realization that the woman I loved, the woman I'd built a life with, had already made her decision. She wasn't sorry, she wasn't remorseful. She was done. More, I asked, my voice barely audible. What does more even mean, Karen? Lying? Sneaking around? Making me feel like I'm losing my mind because you can't just be honest? She shrugged, and that simple, indifferent gesture was the final blow. Maybe I just want to be happy, Ryan, and maybe you're not enough to make that happen. Her words hung in the air, sharp and painful. I looked at her, really seeing her for the first time, not the woman I married, not the person I thought I knew, but someone who had already checked out, someone who didn't care who she hurt as long as she got what she wanted. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. If that's how you feel, then maybe you should go find your happiness with Greg. Because I'm done being played for a fool. I'm done trying to fix something you've already broken. For a brief second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, surprise, maybe even fear, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by that same cold mask. Maybe I will, she said, her tone dismissive. Maybe that's exactly what I need. I watched her walk out of the kitchen, her back straight, head held high, as if she hadn't just ripped my heart out and stomped on it. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to release the rage and pain that was tearing me apart, but instead, I just stood there, staring at the empty doorway. I realized then that whatever we had was gone. It wasn't a marriage anymore, it was an illusion, a hollow shell of what it used to be. And as much as it hurt, as much as it made me want to collapse, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Not with someone who didn't respect me, who didn't love me enough to even tell the truth. I took one last look at the kitchen, the half-made sandwiches on the counter, the life I thought I had, and then I turned away. It was time to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. It was time to let go. After that confrontation in the kitchen, the house turned into a battlefield of silence. Karen barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was like talking to a stranger, distant, almost robotic. The tension was suffocating, and every second around her felt unbearable. I knew something had to change. Either we'd fix this, or we'd end it for good. But Karen wasn't interested in fixing anything. She came and went as she pleased, her attitude dripping with contempt, daring me to say something. One day, I came home early from work and found her packing a suitcase. She didn't even look surprised, just glanced up at me like I was an inconvenience, like my presence had interrupted her plans. "What's this?" I asked, my voice low, struggling to stay calm. She tossed clothes into the suitcase carelessly, not bothering to fold them. "I'm leaving for a few days," she said with a shrug, like it was no big deal. "I need some space. I'm going to stay with Greg." My stomach dropped. There it was, blunt and unapologetic. No pretense, no excuses. She was going to stay with the man she'd been cheating on me with, and she didn't even have the decency to hide it. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists, feeling the last bit of hope crumble. "Really, Karen," I said, my voice trembling with barely controlled anger. "You're just going to walk out? You don't even care anymore, do you? You're not even pretending." She paused for a moment, one hand resting on the suitcase, then looked at me with a hard expression. "No, Ryan, I don't care. I haven't cared for a long time. I tried to tell you I was unhappy, but you didn't listen. You just assumed everything was fine. But I'm not fine, and I don't want to be here anymore." Her words hit me like blows, each one more brutal than the last. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice breaking. 8 years together, and you just decide it's over because you found someone else?" She sighed, exasperated, like she was tired of the conversation, tired of me. "This isn't about Greg," she said, and I almost laughed at how absurd that sounded. "This is about me. I'm not happy here, Ryan. I need to figure out who I am without you." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers, searching for any sign of the woman I once knew. "You're kidding yourself if you think this is just about finding yourself," I said, my voice sharp. "You're running away because it's easier than facing what you've done. You're taking the coward's way out." For the first time, something real flickered in her eyes, anger. She dropped the shirt she was holding and turned to face me fully, her hands on her hips. "You think I'm a coward?" she snapped. "Do you have any idea what it's been like for me? Do you know how long I've felt trapped in this marriage, pretending everything was okay while I was dying inside?" I took a step back, stunned. "Trapped," I repeated, the word foreign on my tongue. "That's how you see it. I thought we were partners, Karen. I thought we were building a life together." She shook her head, her eyes hard and unfeeling. "Maybe you were, Ryan, but I wasn't. I was playing a role, trying to be the perfect wife for you, and I'm done pretending." A wave of nausea hit me as the room seemed to spin. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't believe the woman I loved was standing in front of me, saying these things like our life together meant nothing. "Fine," I said, my voice hollow. "If that's what you want, then go. I'm done trying to make you stay. If you think you'll be happier with Greg, then be my guest, but don't you dare come crawling back when it all falls apart." She didn't respond, just turned back to her suitcase and continued packing. I watched her for a moment, my heart breaking all over again, and then I turned and walked out of the room. I couldn't bear to watch her leave. I collapsed on the couch in the living room, staring at the wall, my mind blank. I heard her moving around the house, zipping up the suitcase, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Then the front door opened, and she was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, staring at the empty space where she used to be, feeling everything and nothing all at once, anger, pain, disbelief, sorrow crashing over me like relentless waves, until I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, punch something, or do anything to make it all stop, but I couldn't move. I was frozen by the finality of it all, realizing that she was truly gone. It was over. The life I thought I had, the marriage I thought we were still fighting for, was finished. Karen had made her decision. She chose Greg, herself, anything but me, and as much as it tore me apart, I knew I had to let her go. She wasn't the woman I had married anymore. She had become someone else, someone I no longer recognized, someone who didn't love me the way I loved her. Maybe she was right. Perhaps I had missed the signs of her unhappiness. Maybe I hadn't noticed what was right in front of me. But that didn't make what she had done any less cruel. It didn't justify the lies, the betrayal, or the way she had ripped us apart without hesitation. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the pain, grasping for something, anything, to hold on to. But all I felt was emptiness, a hollow ache where my heart used to be. I didn't know what to do next or how to move forward, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. Karen had let go, and it was time for me to accept that and find a way to be okay with it. In the days after Karen left, the house felt like a graveyard. Everything reminded me of her: the coffee mugs in the kitchen, the blankets she always insisted on keeping on the couch, even the silly magnets we'd collected from vacations. Her presence seemed to haunt every corner of our home, and I couldn't escape it. The silence was suffocating, so I did the only thing that made sense. I buried myself in work, filling the void with endless meetings and deadlines. One evening, about a week after she left, I realized I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I needed to get out, to breathe. I ended up at a bar downtown, the kind of place with dim lighting and creaky stools, where no one asked questions and everyone kept to themselves. It was exactly what I needed. I ordered a whiskey neat and found a seat at the far end of the bar, away from the crowd. The bartender, an older man with a kind face, gave me a nod as he poured my drink. I offered a tired smile, grateful that he didn't try to make conversation. I was halfway through my second glass, the burn of the whiskey numbing the sharp edges of my thoughts, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. I turned, and there she was, Megan. She worked with Karen, though in a different department. We'd met a few times at office events, always friendly, always smiling. But seeing her here, in this dimly lit bar, with her coat half off and a surprised look on her face, felt completely out of place. "Megan," I said, blinking in disbelief. She smiled hesitantly, clearly unsure if she should approach. "Hey, Ryan," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Yeah, I didn't expect to see you either," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual, though part of me wondered if she was here because of Karen. She gestured to the stool next to me. "Mind if I sit?" I shrugged. "Go ahead." She ordered a drink, and for a few moments we sat in silence. I could feel her glancing at me, like she was trying to figure out how to start the conversation. Finally, she spoke. "I heard about Karen," she said quietly. "I'm really sorry, Ryan." I let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. "Yeah, well, it is what it is," I muttered, staring into my glass. She made her choice. Megan nodded, her expression softening. "I don't want to pry, but if you need to talk, I'm here. You don't deserve what she's doing. You really don't." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I saw genuine concern. There was no judgment in her eyes, no pity, just warmth and understanding. I swallowed hard, feeling a bit of the tightness in my chest loosen. "You know," I said, my voice rough, "I followed her last week. Saw her with Greg. She didn't even try to hide it, like she wanted me to catch her." Megan's expression darkened, and she shook her head. "I never liked that guy. Everyone at the office knows he's a snake. I'm sorry you had to go through that." We talked for a while, and she listened, really listened, as I spilled everything I'd been holding in. How I had tried to be a good husband, how I had ignored the signs, and how it felt to see her with someone else. Megan didn't interrupt. She didn't offer meaningless reassurances. She just sat there, her eyes never leaving mine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Then she said something that completely caught me off guard. "You deserve better than this, Ryan. You deserve someone who sees you, who appreciates you, not someone who takes you for granted." I looked at her, and there was something in her gaze that made my heart skip a beat. It was warmth, yes, but also something deeper, something I hadn't seen in a long time. I wasn't sure what it was, but it made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as broken as I thought. "Thanks, Megan," I said softly. "I don't know what comes next, but thanks for being here." She smiled, a real smile, and it felt like a light breaking through the darkness. "Anytime, Ryan. You're not alone, okay?" We stayed at the bar for hours, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time since Karen left, I laughed, not a forced laugh, but a real, genuine one. And for a moment I felt like a part of me that had been buried was finally coming back to life. As we left, the cold night air hit me, and I realized I didn't want to go back to that empty house, not alone. Megan must have seen it on my face, because she hesitated, then asked, "Do you want to grab a coffee or something? I know a place that's open late." I looked at her, at the way her eyes held mine, and nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." We walked down the street together, side by side, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Karen was gone, maybe the life I thought I had was over, but as I walked with Megan, I realized that maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. My head wasn't pounding with anger or clouded by grief. I felt lighter, like I could finally see my life clearly. Spending time with Megan the night before had done something unexpected. It reminded me what it felt like to be cared for, genuinely cared for, without conditions or lies. We ended up at a cozy little cafe she knew, tucked away on a quiet street. We talked until nearly sunrise, not about Karen or Greg, but about everything else. For a few hours, I forgot about the mess waiting for me at home. Megan had a way of pulling me out of my head, making me feel like there was more to life than just betrayal and heartbreak. She reminded me that I was still myself, someone worth knowing, someone worth being around. But that newfound clarity also made one thing painfully obvious: I couldn't keep pretending that my marriage had any chance of survival. Karen had left, and whether she eventually came back or not, the truth was undeniable: we were done. There was no way to fix the damage, and I had to face it. It was time to take the steps necessary to close this chapter for good. So, later that afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I drove to Greg's house. I knew where he lived. Karen had mentioned it enough times in the context of work events and parties she supposedly couldn't attend. It was, of course, in one of those upscale neighborhoods where every lawn is pristine and the cars in the driveways gleam. I parked a little down the street and sat there for a moment, heart pounding. I wasn't sure what I hoped to accomplish, but I needed to see this for myself, to confront it head on. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked up to the front door, my pulse pounding in my throat. I forced myself to stay composed as I rang the doorbell, and the seconds stretched out unbearably long. The door opened, and there she was, Karen. She looked startled to see me standing there, her eyes widening with surprise before annoyance quickly replaced it. She was dressed casually, like she always did on weekends: leggings, a loose sweater, her hair tied up. For a moment we just stared at each other, the silence thick with tension. "Ryan," she said flatly, crossing her arms. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed, feeling my mouth go dry. "We need to talk, Karen. I'm not going to sit around waiting for you to come back anymore. We need to figure out what happens next." She sighed, frustrated, glancing over her shoulder before stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind her. "This really isn't the time," she muttered, almost dismissively. "I'm busy." I almost laughed at how ridiculous that sounded. She had walked out on our life, left everything behind, and now she was too busy to talk about our marriage. "Busy?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're seriously standing there telling me you're too busy to talk about our marriage?" Her face hardened, lips pressing into a thin line. "Look, I've already told you how I feel, Ryan. Coming here unannounced isn't going to change anything." I stepped closer, feeling my anger bubbling up. "That's just it, Karen. I'm not here to change anything. I'm here because I need to hear it from you. Are you really done with us? Are you really willing to throw everything away for this?" She hesitated, her eyes momentarily flickering with doubt, and for a brief second, I thought maybe, just maybe, there was still a part of her that cared. But then, the door behind her opened, and there he was. Greg, with a smug grin, stood there, his eyes darting between me and Karen like he was enjoying the show. "Everything okay out here?" he asked, his voice casual, almost mocking. Karen turned to him, her expression softening as she looked at him. "It's fine, Greg. I'm handling it," she said sweetly, the sharp edge gone from her voice. And that was it, the final nail in the coffin. The way she looked at him, how her whole demeanor shifted when he was around, it was everything I needed to see. She had made her decision. She wasn't torn between two lives. She had picked her side, and it wasn't mine. Something inside me broke at that moment, but at the same time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. My heart might have been shattering, but at least now I knew. I looked at Greg, his smirk making my blood boil, and I took a step back. "You know what, Karen," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I don't need to hear anything else. I see it now. You've made your choice, and I'm not going to stand here begging for scraps." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She just nodded, her face emotionless. "I'm sorry it had to be this way, Ryan," she said, but her words lacked any real sincerity. I turned around, my fists clenched, and walked away. I heard Greg say something to her in a low, amused tone, but I didn't look back. Whatever they had, whatever lies they were feeding themselves, it wasn't my problem anymore. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away without a second glance. As I drove, a strange sense of peace settled over me. It was over. There was no more wondering, no more hoping. Karen had chosen her path, and now it was time for me to choose mine. I pulled over at a park a few miles away, the sun setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. I sat there, taking it all in, and pulled out my phone. I needed to talk to someone who had been there for me when no one else was. I found Megan's number and sent her a message. "Hey, it's over. I need a fresh start. Want to grab dinner tonight?" A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with her reply. "I'd love that. You're going to be okay, Ryan." And for the first time, I believed it. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I wasn't alone. There were people in my life who cared about me, who wouldn't lie, who wouldn't betray me. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a small flicker of hope ignite inside me. It was time to let go of the past and start building something new. Maybe this time it would be with someone who truly cared. Later that evening I met Megan at a cozy Italian restaurant she had suggested. The warm lighting and the smell of fresh bread created a comforting atmosphere. The moment I saw her, something inside me relaxed. She stood up to greet me, her smile genuine, her eyes filled with concern, and as I walked over, I realized I had been looking forward to this moment all day. "Hey," I said, pulling out the chair across from her. "Hey," she replied softly. "I'm really glad you called." We ordered our food, and soon, conversation flowed easily between us, just like it had the night before. It felt natural to be with her, sharing my thoughts without fear of judgment. We talked about work, movies we wanted to see, and places we hoped to visit one day. It wasn't forced or uncomfortable, it was just nice. Eventually, the conversation turned back to what had happened earlier that day. I told her about going to Greg's house, about what I had said to Karen, and how it had all ended. Megan listened intently, nodding occasionally, her gaze never leaving mine. "You really did it," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "You went there and faced her." I nodded, taking a sip of wine. Yeah, I needed to. I couldn't keep living in limbo, hoping she'd change her mind. I had to see it for what it was. I looked down at the table, the words heavier than I had expected. It hurt, seeing her with him like that, knowing it was really over. But in a way, it was also freeing. Megan reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. Her touch was warm, comforting. "You did the right thing, Ryan. You deserve someone who actually wants to be with you, not someone stringing you along. It's going to be tough, but you're strong enough to get through it." I gazed into her eyes, feeling that flicker of hope again. Megan wasn't just trying to comfort me, she genuinely believed in what she was saying, and for the first time, I started to believe it too. We stayed at the restaurant until closing, talking and laughing, losing track of time. It felt like a break from reality, a glimpse of what life could be if I allowed myself to move on. As we finally left, Megan offered to walk me to my car, her arm brushing against mine as we strolled down the quiet street. When we reached my car, we both hesitated, neither of us ready for the night to end. I turned to her, the words catching in my throat before I finally spoke. "Megan, I don't know what's next for me. I don't even know if I'm ready for whatever this is I gestured between us. But I know I like being around you, and I'd like to see where it goes, if you're okay with that." She smiled, her eyes softening. "I get it, Ryan. I'm not in a rush. I just want to be here for you however you need me, and maybe, eventually, we can see where this could go." I leaned in and kissed her cheek, my heart pounding. She turned slightly, and for a brief second, our lips brushed, sending a spark through my whole body. It wasn't rushed or forced, it was soft, genuine and real. "Good night, Megan," I whispered, stepping back, my emotions swirling hope, fear, excitement. "Good night, Ryan," she replied, her smile lingering as she turned and walked away, glancing back at me one last time before disappearing around the corner. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of peace. The memories of Karen and everything that had happened were still there, but they didn't sting as much. It wasn't that I had forgotten, but that I could finally see beyond them. When I arrived home, the house felt different. The emptiness was still there, but it no longer suffocated me. I knew Karen wasn't coming back, and for the first time I was okay with that. I sat down on the couch, the same one where we had argued, the same one where I had watched her walk out, and I took a deep breath. The weight of the past few weeks began to lift. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. Expecting a message from Megan, I picked it up, but it was from a number I didn't recognize. Frowning, I opened the message. "You need to know something about Greg. He's not who you think he is. Meet me tomorrow at the cafe on 5th. It's important. Pray, Annette." My heart skipped a beat. Who was this? What could they possibly have to tell me about Greg? I reread the message, trying to make sense of it. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave Greg and Karen in the past where they belonged. But another part, the part that still craved answers, couldn't let it go. The next morning, I made my way to the cafe, my mind racing with possibilities. Who could it be? Someone from Karen's job? A friend of Greg's? I arrived early, ordered a coffee, and took a seat by the window, scanning the room. After a few minutes, a woman approached my table. She looked familiar, and as she sat down, I realized I had seen her before at one of Karen's office parties. She introduced herself as Lisa, one of Karen's colleagues. "Thanks for coming, Ryan," she said, her voice low, her eyes darting around nervously. "I don't have much time, but you need to hear this." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her expression serious. "Greg isn't just Karen's boss. He's done this before, gotten involved with women at work, made promises, then moved on when things got complicated. He's manipulative, Ryan. He knows how to get what he wants, and he doesn't care who gets hurt." I stared at her, letting the words sink in. "Are you saying Karen is just another one of his flings?" Lisa nodded. "Yes, I've seen it before. He's good at making them feel special, like he's the answer to all their problems, but it never lasts. He always finds someone new. I thought you should know before it's too late for Karen." I sat back, my head spinning. The anger, the betrayal, it all came rushing back, but this time it was mixed with something else, pity. Karen had thrown everything away for a man who saw her as nothing more than a temporary distraction. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lisa looked down, her expression pained. "Because I know what it's like to be lied to be manipulated by someone you trust. I don't know if you can save your marriage, but I thought you deserved the truth." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it." She stood, giving me a sad smile. "Good luck, Ryan. I hope you find what you're looking for." As she walked away, I sat there, staring at my coffee, my mind reeling. Karen had made her choice, but maybe she didn't know the whole truth. Maybe she was as much a victim as I had been. For a brief moment, I considered reaching out to her, warning her, trying to get her to see the reality. But then I thought of Megan, of the warmth in her smile, of the hope she had given me. I realized that whatever Karen did now, it was no longer my responsibility. She had walked away from us, from me, and now it was my turn to walk away from her and towards something better. I stood up, left some money on the table, and walked out of the cafe, ready to move forward. The sun was shining, the air crisp, and for the first time in what seemed like ages, I felt ready to finally let go. That evening, I sat in the living room, glancing around at the house that once echoed with laughter and dreams for the future. It was surreal how quickly everything had shifted, how something that once felt so secure had turned cold and unfamiliar in just a few short weeks. I picked up the framed photo of Karen and me from the mantel, taken on our honeymoon, both of us smiling, sun-kissed, and full of hope. Now, it felt like a glimpse into someone else's life. I knew what needed to be done. Letting go emotionally wasn't enough. I had to close this chapter completely. It was time to take action. I grabbed my laptop, opened it, and began researching the steps to file for divorce. It was time to make it official, to cut the ties that had already frayed beyond repair in our hearts and minds. Each click, each form I filled out, felt like I was slowly chipping away at the pain, reclaiming my life piece by piece. The paperwork was exhausting but liberating at the same time. Every detail I filled in, every digital signature I made, lightened the load I had been carrying. When I finally clicked submit, a strange sense of calm settled over me. It was done, the first real step toward freedom, toward a new beginning. That night I called Megan and told her everything about Lisa, the message, and filing for divorce. She listened without interrupting, her voice steady and supportive, just as it always had been. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before she spoke. "Ryan, you did the right thing. You deserve to move forward, and it sounds like you're finally giving yourself that chance." There was a warmth in her voice that wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, so genuine and sincere. "I know it might feel too soon to say this, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you." Emotion tightened in my throat. "Megan, I don't know where this is going, but I want to find out with you. You've been a light in all this darkness, and I'm not sure I deserve that, but I want to try." She didn't hesitate. "You do deserve it, Ryan, and I want to try too." The next few days were a blur of packing, sorting, and organizing. I decided it was time to leave the house. It held too many memories, too many echoes of what once was. I found a smaller apartment on the other side of town, a fresh start in a space where Karen's presence wouldn't linger in every corner. I spent those days boxing up remnants of our life together, setting them aside, knowing I wasn't quite ready to face them yet. On my last night in that house, I invited Megan over. It felt right having her there as I said goodbye to the life that no longer fit. She arrived with a bottle of champagne and a smile that made everything else fade into the background. We sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and toasted to new beginnings. To freedom, I said, clinking my glass against hers. "To hope," she replied, her eyes meeting mine, a playful smile on her lips. We talked for hours, our laughter filling the empty house one last time. It was bittersweet, but it also felt like closure, the end of the life I'd shared with Karen and the beginning of something new. I was finally ready to accept that. The next morning, with the last box loaded into the moving truck, I stood on the front lawn and looked at the house one final time. I expected to feel a pang of sadness, a sense of loss, but instead, I felt relief. I had given everything to that marriage, to that chapter of my life, and now it was time to give something to myself. I turned to Megan, who was waiting by her car, her expression full of encouragement and something deeper, something that hinted at a future I hadn't dared to imagine before. I walked over to her, and for a moment we stood together in the sunlight. I reached for her hand, and she held it tightly, her fingers interlacing with mine. "You ready?" she asked, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." We drove to my new apartment together. As we stepped through the door, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. There were no memories here, no ghosts of broken promises, just a clean slate, a chance to start over and build something real with someone who truly cared. As we unpacked boxes, Megan turned to me, her eyes soft and her smile sincere. "This is your fresh start, Ryan. You can make it whatever you want." I looked around the empty apartment and then back at her, feeling a wave of hope wash over me. "I think I already have everything I need," I said, pulling her close and wrapping my arms around her. We stayed like that for a while, standing in the middle of my new living room, the future stretched out ahead of us. I knew there would still be tough days ahead. Divorce wasn't easy, and the scars from betrayal wouldn't disappear overnight. But for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I could see a future worth fighting for. It wasn't about Karen anymore. It wasn't about Greg, or the lies, or the hurt. It was about me reclaiming my life, my happiness, and maybe, just maybe, finding love again. And with Megan by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next,